I'm Jessica Midden for IB Times TV, reporting from the floor of the New York Stock Exchange, and joining me today is Keith Bliss of Cuttone. Now, we are getting Apple after the bell today. This is the big earnings for this week, and we did see Microsoft, Amazon, Zynga last week. Going into Apple's earnings, obviously, they did just beat expectations for their previous quarter, but they did show that sign of struggling in China. What do you think we'll hear from them from these earnings?
Well, from an earnings perspective, they're expected to report about $8 a share. I think the actual number that the consensus is $7.92 to be precise. I'm sure they will engineer their financials and get to that number slightly ahead. And the revenues will be in the mid-30s, which is a typical third quarter for them. So the big news that we're looking at of Apple for this quarter is they've already released all their products, or at least that's what everybody thinks. They've already shown us everything, the iPad Air, the iPad Mini, the 5C, the 5S. So we want to hear how those products are doing. So far, I think the new iPhones are not doing as well as they expected. The 5C is actually not as cheap as people think for a mid-range smartphone to come in. And the 5S, they've had production problems with that. I mean, believe it or not, I know a couple of people waiting for their gold 5Ss. Why they want those things, I have no idea. But anyway, and then they've announced, the iPad Minis without actually having a real launch date. So it's going to be kind of an odd announcement. It's not based on product launches, which they've done in the past on their quarterly earnings. It's going to be all about financials and performance of the company. So there'll be some really interesting questions, I'm sure, and we'll all be watching with great interest as well.
Now, with their September release of the cheaper 5C and the 5S, their quarter actually ended later on in September, so will it take some time to see how much longer that these sales can continue along with, because they just released that iPad Air as well? Do we have to wait a couple of quarters to see about those sales?
Well, we need to wait a couple of quarters to see about the iPads, but the 5S and the 5C have been out there for some time, and of course that's what everybody is really waiting for. There's been enough time for them to gauge what has been the interest in the 5C and the 5S. I mean, think about it, when Apple releases a product, they generally have very front-loaded sales. People are waiting in lines at the stores, they're killing each other to get these products, so we know pretty quickly how well the new products are going to perform. So, the 5C, the 5S have been out there for some time. Again, the 5C was meant to compete against the Android phones in the other developing markets. And the rumor is that it's not doing so well. It's still not as cheap as other Android phones that you can find in some of the emerging and frontier economies, which is going to be the next great frontier, I guess, for Apple. They'll always have good sales here in the US because they have a loyal client base that will buy anything that they produce. So analysts are not too worried about that. But where is the next great bump in top-line revenue going to come from? It's going to come from new markets and new products, and we've already seen all the new products this year, so it's got to come from new markets.
Last week when Apple had their announcement for the iPad Air and the other products that they unveiled, it was conveniently before Microsoft had their earnings. Do you think we're going to have any sort of surprises from Apple?
That's always the guess, and that's why everybody watches, and that's why the entire market watches Apple's earnings, because as you know, in talking to me, it's always one of the biggest components of an earnings release for me is what is management saying about the future? What are top-line sales like, and what are they saying for the future? You know, Apple's biggest quarter is always the fourth quarter because everybody's rushing in, pardon me, to buy products for the Christmas season, the holiday season. So what are they going to say about that? Will they surprise us with a new product? Will they come out with something that will compete with Samsung's watch product? The watch product, by the way, from a technical standpoint, is not very well received, so does Apple sense an opportunity to come in and take that? Will we finally see the much hyped Apple TV? I think Tim Cook probably has a couple things up his sleeve. They're marketers first and financial guys second. So I would encourage everybody to watch this earnings announcement tonight if you're interested in the markets, because it could be quite interesting.
Now, looking ahead to the economic calendar for this week, we are getting the FOMC meeting, and it seems as though the whole taper scenario is much likely off the table because of the government shutdown. What should we really look for towards them?
Well, the taper conversation is off the table not only for the government shutdown, but the economy is just struggling along. I mean, make no mistake about it, they've tied the employment data to any kind of taper conversation. Manufacturing is starting to weaken. Pending home sales, by the way, which was released today, is on a negative trajectory. It's been down now 4 months in a row. So I kind of chuckled to myself when the National Association of Realtors economists tried to say that pending home sales were down because of the government shutdown. That's nonsense. There was 800,000 people that were furloughed, and they knew they were going back to work at some point, it wouldn't have stopped them from going and buying a new house. It's slowing down for another reason. I think it has to do with people's confidence, has to do with overall economic outlook. So back to the Fed. I think what we hear from the Fed is that they're going to stay steady as she goes. I'm sure Chairman Bernanke would have liked to have started exiting before he left the chairman's chair. That's not going to happen. And I'm pretty sure that future Chairwoman Yellen, despite any kind of filibuster that may happen in the Senate, I'm sure she'll just continue on with the policies as they are, regardless of the efficacy, which is the great debate in the marketplace right now. So expect the taper, or expect the Fed to be in the market for some time to come. The earliest I think we would see a taper is March of 2014.
Well, Keith, as always, it's great to have your insight on everything that's going on. That's Keith Bliss of Cuttone, and I'm Jessica Minton for IB Times TV.